Good afternoon, Chuck Edwards here. Been a few weeks, been probably more like about 5 or 6 weeks with the holidays. Uh, haven't had a chance to do a video, but I have thought about some of the videos I'd like to do, and kind of, I guess, the new year created in my mind, an opportunity to sort of resolve to do this a little more regularly and bring up some additional of um, questions and just see where it goes. I don't really know exactly where it's supposed to head, but I did want to start the year off by putting something out there and kind of revisit a couple of the questions that I brought up in the past, and I've had over the last few weeks, as I've been thinking about things that I might include in one of these sessions. I was asked a couple of questions, and I thought I would pose those to you and just give you a little bit of feedback about that. Okay, so one of the things that I remember bringing up in the past was, how does someone answer or address what would be very reasonable or legitimate questions uh, about creationism as opposed to scientific explanations for things. So there's a couple items that I want to mention to you, because I was very, very, as I mentioned in the past, very logic based, studied science, read all sorts of other types of things that, to me, uh, answered part of the question or answered some of the question, but not necessarily answered a lot of the question. And so let me kind of throw a few things out there. This might surprise some people, that I was asked by someone, do you don't really think evolution exists? And I do. I absolutely believe evolution happens. It is scientifically understandable how different, whether it's species of dogs or species of other kinds of animals, or people overall, adapt over time to their environment. And it's clear that this happens, sometimes in pretty extreme ways, sometimes in just very minute or more subtle ways, but they still happen. And that evolution is not necessarily, doesn't necessarily, in my mind anyway, have to be wrong for creationism to be correct as well. I think that they can both exist. They're mutually exclusive in some ways, but oftentimes there's a major and a lot of overlap. In fact, I believe that that is one of our Creator's ways in which He makes sure we do adapt and learn and grow from the things that we see around us environment. That is to me completely possible to recognize that. The thing that is confusing to me, that no matter how much I tend to look at evolution, or I tend to try to use it as an example or an answer to certain things, there's still things that don't make sense. So, like, if I'm looking to science for answers, um, and I did for many, many, many years to try to look for science for answers, here's a couple things that are true. There are no examples of cats, within the archaeological records, no examples of things jumping from species to species. Whether it's Darwin and and it's birds on the Galapagos Island, or whether it's reptiles in Madagascar, or whatever the case may be, there are clear adaptations from one to the other. There are leaps, scientific leaps of faith of sorts, where they say, well, if this happened over here, then this fish became amphibious, and on down the road. Okay, so those are gaps there, and to me, not out of the ordinary to think that way, but there's still a lot missing. I mean, there is a lot to explain through science. And I believe that the Lord made our brain capable of understanding things on a higher level than the animals around us. And so, therefore, we should try to use it to explain and give ourselves answers. But it is unfair, I believe, to say, well, science has answered all these questions, because it really hasn't. Um, One of the things that I've heard early on as a Christian, and I just, like I said, it's only been a couple of years now I've been a Christian, but I used to, be thought and think about things like 7 days, these just seem like stories. Can they really make sense? And here's what I realized: I don't have to know whether I don't have to know the details. I just have to accept that there is an alternative. And so for my goal here is to have you not necessarily prove beyond a shadow of a doubt something happened or didn't happen. Prove beyond any question or reasonable thought that this is, in my mind, it's a fallacy to think it has to be either this or that. There could be a lot of back and forth. And that fallacy in reasoning, to me, kind of washed away whenever I asked for, received, and became a saved individual. Like I said, okay, God, I don't know the answers. I don't know what I'm supposed to do. Give me clarity. Help me see things that I haven't seen. And sometimes it was an answer to a question. Sometimes on a personal relationship or in a very, very close way, I was able to see things different than I had ever seen. Sometimes I was able to see things about myself that I was never able to see. These were given to me by my Creator when I asked for them, not before then. I tried very hard to do that on my own. I couldn't do it. I tried very hard to find those answers and different methods, but it was only after I gave myself surrendered myself completely that I was able to see my own failings and my weaknesses, my own interactions. I was able to see things in such a way that it was just it was a whole new world. And so there's, to me, what I'm trying to do when I ask these questions is not answer those for you, but have you stop and think, is there some explanation? It's very, it's true, in fact, that the Hebrew word, when they talk about number of days in creation, like 6 days, God created these things, and seventh day he rested. Well, the Hebrew word that is actually used by in the Bible that has been translated as day actually could mean lots of things. It's like a time period. It could be an eon. It could be an era. It could be it's not a day like morning to night or day to day. It's so much as it is just a segment of time. So if you look, and once I was watching a Nova episode, and they take you through different things that happened on Earth, and how how fish came to be, and how the oceans became alive, and how the plants became around, and it was pretty startling how, if you just segmented things, let's just say in a segment of 1 billion years, right, just round numbers, this billion years these things happen, the second billion years these things happen, the third billion years these things happen. Maybe that is really what happened, more so than a day, and we just have kind of translated or allowed continual variations of that initial explanation to happen. Why? Because the people that first wrote this didn't probably even grasp a billion anything, much less 1 billion years. And so I don't need to know that details. I don't need to know precisely how much time it took to do this and do that and do that. I just have to recognize that there has to be some intervention, some divine component to what is going on. And that's another thing about science. They want you to believe in the Big Bang, and they want you to think about the point in the singularity when all things started. But they never can give you a real explanation of how you went from absolutely nothing to something, even if it was a Big Bang that created it. And I'm not 100% sure whether or not the Big Bang wasn't what God used to start things. I don't know. Don't need to know exactly, precisely what happened. I would like to know, and just so you know, that tendency to want to know the exact detail was the old me. That was clearly what drove me for decades and get my own demons in my own brain. It caused me all kinds of grief and challenges on a personal basis, on a professional basis, on an educational basis. I wanted to find that answer. I wanted to understand what was happening, and sometimes you just can't. And so that's what I realized in April of that year when I became a believer, is that if I totally surrender myself and I allow God to be in part of me, change my heart, be part of me, in me, and then I become part of Him in the way that I act, in the way that I behave, in the way that I do things. I had to recognize that, I don't really have to understand everything. It's kind of like All I got to know is that when I get in the car and I start it, it's going to start. I don't have to understand all the engineering behind the combustible engine or, braking systems or whatever else. It's not necessary for me to be able to benefit from the vehicle. In this case, I don't have to know all the specific details of how things were created or what was done. I just have to know that it was done on my behalf. It was done. It is continued and allows me to benefit and be blessed in ways that I would have never recognized before if I would not have surrendered. And I just have to see that there are questions that I may not know the answer to, and no one may really know the answer to until they get to ask the Creator. So I want to say those things. One of the items that is true when I get asked about archaeological records, the historical records. There's things. How could this be true? The dinosaurs were 10 million years ago. However long they were, they say. And what I've found is if you watch a lot of scientists who already sort of believe every aspect of their worldview, then what they find they make it fit into it. And that's true often with Christian scientists. Whatever they're finding, they tend to say, see, this is why it's a young Earth, and this is why this is possible. So, where do you go with that information? I can say that I've watched some of the same videos that maybe others have, and it is pretty intriguing how they could take, the feathers off of a live penguin and carbon date it, and it shows to be millions of years old. Well, that makes me scratch my head and go, well, then if they can't even clearly understand how old a live penguin is, or that a penguin is alive or dead, then could they really be considered a valuable tool to date something else, some other kinds of fossil or whatever. I also remember seeing an example of a scientist. This was a secular scientist. He was not a Christian scientist, and he was caught off guard, basically flabbergasted at how the circumstances were such where he was doing some research that a fossil was created in hours. And of course, I thought that was impossible. I thought it took years, millions of years, hundreds and tens of thousands of years to create some of these fossils. And then, and he flatly said, the only thing that can be understood from this is that a fossil was created. Now there's a fossil record where there wasn't. And so I'll try to get the specifics on those. I look up those particular items, because what intrigued me most about them was that in both cases it was the scientific community that were saying these things, not a preacher or not someone who wanted you to spin it a certain way and only think about it a certain way. These were true men of science who were observing a situation, and it did not happen the way they expected. So those are some things that have come to mind. I know that the dating methods have gotten a lot of negativity, and I understand the archaeological record, and I understand all have questions. It doesn't mean that every question can be answered or disproven. Once again, I'm just trying to look for some reasonable doubt here. I'm trying to help someone who thinks, well, that's already been locked, put in stone, written in a book. There's no doubt. There really are some things that don't really make sense with the scientific explanation. And to be honest, exactly the same way that some things within the theological explanations don't really make sense. I've got millions of questions that I'm like, wow, God, okay, here's a question. God, of all the things you could have chose as a method to save us, why would you want to send your son and then have your son be killed? That seems like an extreme solution to the problem. There could be lots of other things. And maybe there is going to be a time in my life when I understand that better, but really, there doesn't have to be right now, because for me, it's more about sort of, I guess, the journey. I mean, it kind of hate to sound so hallmarkish, right? It's more about the journey than it is, about than the destination or something like that. Um, but there's some truth to that. I was asked by a very good friend of mine. We were just kind of talking, and roughly, he said, well, "How do you know what you think is right?" And it kind of, I realized, that's a question that probably even Christians may ask themselves sometimes. Man, how do I know that what the Hindus are doing, or within the Christian faith? How do I know what Baptists are doing or Catholics are doing or whatever? How do I know that my way is right? And it, that is the question, like the old me would ask. What is the right way? How do I know this way is the right way? And man, I really got to thinking about that. Uh, I'm gonna I'm gonna make that answer the next video. How do I know that? Or what do you respond, or how do you respond to somebody who asks that question? Because for me, it really stuck in my head for days. Um, and I will, the next time, the next couple of 2, 3 videos or so, I'm going to try to get us some of the scientists that I was mentioning, maybe some websites and things that people can go to, and kind of I guess, enlightened in the way I was, that a lot of the scientific explanations of things, while still seeming reasonable, have a lot of holes in them, right? And so the theological explanation, what I want you to do, hopefully, over the course of time, is to maybe look at it as, a reasonable explanation that might have some holes, because we're just human, and we have weaknesses and failings in our own way of thinking about things. But the question, I guess, that I'd put on the next video would be, how do I know what we're doing, or what we think, or what's specific about the Christian faith? How do we know it's right? All right. And I will send that video shortly. Thank you.